Long ago, before anyone can remember, ancient magic was born from nothingness. It was a time of complete silence. But being alone for an eternity is a heavy burden. The spirit just floated there in the dark, waiting. Eventually, the loneliness became too much to handle. The spirit's form began to spiral and condense. Ancient magic expelled raw power into the void, and from that light the first living thing appeared. The gold dragon had arrived. This creature was brilliantly intelligent, but it lacked the wisdom to match its mind. It looked around at its creator with cold eyes. Arrogance flared within its heart the moment it realized its own power. It wasn't content to just exist alongside the magic that made it. The gold dragon called the spirit a little meteor before opening its maw. It lunged at its own creator. It devoured the very magic that had given it life. The dragon thought it had finally taken control of everything. But the energy it consumed didn't just sit still. It began to thrash and roar inside the beast's body. The magic was far too vast for even a creature as great as the gold dragon to contain. It was a power that demanded release. Two massive clumps of pure energy spilled out of the dragon's body. They didn't just fade away, they began to take shape. From that overflow, the red dragon and the blue dragon were born. They were pieces of the same power, yet fundamentally different. These two were polar opposites from the second they opened their eyes. Neither one could stand the presence of the other. The instant they laid eyes on one another, the tension snapped. Their faces twisted into snarls of pure aggression. They clashed with everything they had, breath weapons colliding in the void. It was a war that would last for ages. For tens of thousands of years, the red and blue scales were locked in a cycle of mutual destruction. They didn't care about anything else. While they fought, the gold dragon grew bored and fell into a deep slumber. It didn't seem to mind the chaos below. Debris from their endless battles slowly piled up over the eons, forming the earth. But that wasn't the end of the magic's influence. From the world they inadvertently built, yet another dragon was born, the Lord of Green. It let out a roar that shook the new foundations of the world. The red and blue dragons could only watch in shock. They hadn't expected a fourth to join their ranks. Even as the gold dragon slept, the three others kept pouring their magic into the world. It was an unintentional act of creation. That energy stirred, and ancient life began to crawl out of the shadows. Different races and monsters started to populate the lands. Finally, the gold dragon opened its eyes and looked down at what had become of its world. It wasn't happy with what it saw. It took flight, casting a massive shadow over the landscape born from its own overflow. It looked down on the impure life with disgust. The creature believed that those unlike itself should be kept far away. It had no tolerance for anything it didn't directly create. It watched as the Lord of Green ruled over a legion of elves. To the gold dragon, this was a betrayal of their pure lineage. It couldn't abide any dragon or creature that didn't spring from its own direct power. Its eyes glowed with a lethal intent. The decision was made to cleanse the world of these orcs and other low-born species. A massive purge began. At the same time, in a different reality, a very different war was raging. This was the Northeast Asian front of World War III. A platoon leader pulls out his phone to show off a photo. He's grinning as he introduces his daughter, Jai-Hai. Sergeant Egan sits opposite him, trying to keep a straight face. They're supposed to be in the middle of a serious operational briefing. The leader brushes it off, saying briefings can happen any day. He claims bragging about his kid is a priority that can't wait. He leans in, suggesting that a guy like Egan might even make a good boyfriend for his daughter. Egan just stares back, unimpressed. Egan tries to steer the conversation back to their lack of personnel and equipment. The leader just sighs and salutes mockingly. He calls Egan out by name, clearly annoyed by the sergeant's rigid professionalism. He wants a real conversation for once. The trucks rumble through the rainy night as the leader complains about how long they've been at this. He tells Egan to stop going by the book. He asks Egan what his life was actually like before the world went to hell. He assumes the young man was a complete shut-in. The leader pops a lollipop while wondering how someone so young can know nothing about games or girls. He's genuinely confused by Egan's lack of hobbies. He admits that Egan is a great shot, but calls him an F-tier human in every other category. He's looking for some sign of a personality. He asks if Egan was some kind of special forces operator before joining up. He can't imagine this cold discipline came from anywhere else. A small gecko clings to the wall of the vehicle, twitching slightly. The leader asks if there's anything Egan actually likes in this world. Egan looks at the lizard for a moment, his eyes softening just a tiny bit. He simply replies that he isn't sure. The platoon leader holds out his ruggedized smartphone, thrusting it toward the younger soldier. He's done talking, now he's giving an order. The screen displays a happy family photo of Jai-Hai and her mother. It's not just a picture, though. The leader explains it's full of messages he never had the guts to send. He tells Egan to catch the next evacuation vehicle at the rally point. His voice is firm as he tells the sergeant to get to the rear and take these memories home. Egan tries to protest, but the leader cuts him off immediately. He insists that Egan is far too young to be thrown away as an expendable pawn in this war. The commander gives a small, weary smile while twirling a lollipop. He orders Egan to go find a life worth living, something to actually care about. "I'm counting on you," he says as the vehicle hits a bump, the wheels spinning through the mud. It's a final, heavy request disguised as a command. A blinding flash of light erupts as a massive explosion tears through the camp. The force of the blast is absolute, leveling everything in an instant. The smartphone is ripped from Egan's hand, sailing high into the night sky. It's swept up in the shockwave, trailing smoke as it's launched away. The device tumbles through the air, illuminated only by the pale moon above. It seems to defy gravity for a moment before the world starts to warp. A crackling blue rift suddenly tears open in midair, right in the phone's path. High-frequency energy hums as the space around the device begins to distort. The phone passes through the shimmering portal and tumbles into a completely different world. It falls toward a dark forest filled with strange voices. It bounces on the grass right between the feet of a dying orc. In the shadows, elves are shouting insults, calling the orcs filthy monsters. The elf archer commands his troops to slaughter every last one of the orcs. He's looking down at the screen, but his eyes show nothing but cold disgust. Panic spreads through the forest as someone screams that the gold dragon has arrived. A massive shadow begins to descend from the heavens. A blindingly bright figure with wings and a floating halo touches down. The sheer pressure of its presence makes the air itself feel heavy and dangerous. Another massive explosion of light and magic ripples outward from the landing site. The force sends the smartphone flying once again, tumbling back into the void. The device spins through a chaotic tunnel of light and shadow. It's being tossed across dimensions by forces it was never meant to survive. A final surge of energy grips the phone as it's pulled toward yet another shimmering portal. The world on the other side is dark, cold, and wet. Back on Earth, the heavy rain is washing the blood and soot into the mud. The camp is a graveyard of twisted metal and silent soldiers. Egan checks the platoon leader's pulse, but there's nothing left. He stands up, his voice cold and steady as he announces he's taking command of the platoon. He ignores the grief and immediately begins issuing orders for a tactical withdrawal. They need to regroup with the main force before the next wave hits. As he moves through the wreckage, his boot hits something hard in the mud. He looks down and sees the smartphone he thought was lost. He picks it up with a gloved hand, the light from the screen reflecting in his tired eyes. It's a miracle it's still working after that blast. The screen is shattered into a spiderweb of cracks, distorting the faces of the leader's family. It's a grim reminder of the man who just saved his life. Egan pulls his tactical mask tight, hiding whatever emotion might be flickering across his face. He stares at the damaged screen in silence. He remembers the leader's words about wanting every one of them to make it home. He knows that's a promise he now has to keep for both of them. He can't just retreat and forget everything that happened here. He kneels down one last time beside his fallen commander. "I swear I'll deliver it," he mutters to the rain. He tucks the phone safely away, his resolve hardening into something cold and unbreakable. The moon hangs high over the desolate battlefield, partially hidden by the thick clouds of war. The only sound is the constant patter of rain. A small blue gecko crawls over a rock, its eyes fixed on a bug nearby. It's a tiny spark of life in a place that has seen so much death. The lizard lunges and snaps up its prey, completely unaware of the giants fighting around it. In the distance, the sounds of marching boots return. In the fantasy world, the orcs are trying to regroup as their leaders shout orders to move. They're desperate to save what's left of their tribe. A glowing elven arrow streaks through the trees like a falling star. It hums with a magical resonance that's as beautiful as it is deadly. The projectile finds its mark, piercing through an orc's leg with a sickening thud. He collapses into the dirt, his axe falling from his grip. The rest of the orcs can only watch in horror as their comrade screams in pain. The elven ambushers are closing in from all sides. The elf archer steps out of the foliage, his face twisted in a look of supreme arrogance. To him, this isn't a war, it's a pest control operation. He looks at the struggling orcs and calls them vermin that are rotting his beautiful forest. He has no intention of showing mercy. A massive wave of elven warriors clashes with the remaining orcs. The forest floor becomes a chaotic mess of steel, blood, and desperate cries. One orc refuses to go down without a fight, charging at the nearest elf with a roar. He swings his heavy axe with everything he has left. The elf easily dodges the attack with a graceful spin, looking back with a bored expression. He calls the orc's last stand pathetic. He draws a golden arrow to his cheek, aiming straight for the orc's head. He's ready to end this barbaric display once and for all. Suddenly, a massive flare of green light erupts behind him, drowning out the forest's shadows. Something ancient and powerful has just decided to intervene. Lord of Green dives from the sky, unleashing a concentrated beam of emerald energy from his maw. The light illuminates the dark forest with a sickly, powerful glow. The elven soldiers are caught in the blast, their forms silhouetted against the blinding green light as they are incinerated. The force of the breath weapon sweeps through the clearing like a scythe. The massive dragon banks in the air, his long tail trailing behind as he continues his devastating strafing run. Smoke and debris kick up from the forest floor in his wake. Lord of Green lands heavily among a group of cowering orcs, the ground cracking under his immense weight. He stands as a towering wall of scales between them and their pursuers. He lets out a puff of green smoke, his eyes glowing with purple light as he orders the tribe to gather. His voice rumbles through the earth like a coming storm. A scarred orc looks up in desperation, questioning what will become of their ancestral home if they flee. The rest of the tribe waits in silence for their master's decree. Lord of Green looks down at his subjects with a somber expression, the forest burning behind them. He looms over the small creatures, a godlike figure amidst the ruin. He gives the cold, final command to abandon their territory to the invading elven forces. There is no room for argument in his deep, resonant tone. His wings flare out, casting a wide shadow over the charred earth as he begins a solemn oath. Golden sparks dance along the edges of his green membranes. Lord of Green stands over a fallen figure, declaring himself the one who gives and takes life in the swamp and forest alike. His presence is absolute, a force of nature personified. The dragon rears back and roars his name into the heavens, a declaration of his divine right over every shade of green. The air vibrates with the power of his ancient voice. He vows to reclaim every inch of lost land from the pointy-eared freaks who dare defile his realm. The orcs watch, transfixed by the fury of their lord. His fangs bared, Lord of Green screams his final promise. He will make the elves pay for their insolence. Green fire licks at the corners of his mouth. A mocking voice cuts through his roar, belittling his grand oath as something petty and insignificant. A sudden surge of foreign energy begins to warp the atmosphere. A sphere of intense golden light slams into Lord of Green's chest, the impact sending shockwaves through the air. The green dragon is caught completely off guard. The Lord of Green has its arm severed, its scales charring as the foreign energy tears into its flesh. Black blood spatters the ground as it struggles to maintain its balance. The orcs stare in terror as their protector is struck down by a force they cannot even comprehend. Their world is literally falling apart around them. Gold Dragon descends from above, his halo glowing with a divine, terrifying light that outshines the forest fires. He moves with a predatory grace that dwarfs the green dragon's power. Gold Dragon pins Lord of Green to the ground, his massive claws digging deep into his rival's neck. The disparity in their power is immediately and brutally clear. He sneers at his opponent, calling him an inferior lowborn, nothing more than a scrap of green molted shell. Every word drips with celestial disdain. The Orcs recognize the newcomer as the Gold Dragon, the legendary personification of golden arrogance. They can do nothing but watch as their master is humiliated. Gold Dragon delivers a brutal strike, a shockwave of golden energy flattening the trees for miles around. Lord of Green is driven further into the cratered earth. Lord of Green struggles to speak through the blood in his throat, demanding to know what right the intruder has to rampage in his realm. His defiance is met with only laughter. Gold Dragon simply laughs, a sound like grinding metal, and looks down with eyes full of divine contempt. He calls Lord of Green a foolish little creation. He shifts into a humanoid form, a towering figure of gold and light, declaring himself to be the ancient itself. The air around him hums with concentrated magic. He looms over the broken form of the green dragon, his presence radiating an aura of absolute authority. Lord of Green looks like a mere lizard at his feet. Gold Dragon takes to the air once more, his wings casting a golden hue over the entire battlefield. He declares that he is the right by which all things are judged. Below them, the Elves and Orcs continue their bloody struggle, small and insignificant compared to the celestial clash above. The Gold Dragon mocks the dingy darkness of this world. The halo behind Gold Dragon's head flares with the heat of a miniature sun, preparing to purge the filthy monsters below. His eyes burn with an unforgiving white light. Lord of Green coughs up a cloud of smoke and fire, growling that even arrogance has its limits. He mocks the Gold Dragon's useless, gaudy glow. Gold Dragon looks back over his shoulder, a cruel smile playing on his lips as he listens to the dying dragon's final words. He calls it a fine last speech. He raises his hand, and a massive seal of golden light begins to rotate in the air between them. He wishes for his opponent to find peace on the other side of this dimension. A pillar of pure celestial energy erupts from the seal, vaporizing the ground where Lord of Green lay. The sound is absolute, a roar that drowns out all other noise. Lord of Green's consciousness fades into a dark void, his final thoughts filled with bitter regret and hatred. His physical form is torn apart by the golden light. He imagines the power of the red dragon's flames, wondering if that would have been enough to slay his tormentor. The vision of the red beast haunts his fatting mind. Or perhaps the crushing weight of the blue dragon's waves could have drowned the gold dragon's insufferable pride. These are the fantasies of a dying king. Gold Dragon watches as the green dragon's essence is condensed into a single glowing egg, mocking the idea of revenge. He stares down at the small object with cold eyes. A hand clad in a modern tactical glove reaches out through a rift in space, catching the falling egg. The contrast between the magic and the military gear is stark. Egan stares at the strange, patterned object in his hand, his brow furrowed in confusion. The egg pulses with a faint, otherworldly light in the darkness. He holds the egg up to the moonlight, the pale green shell reflecting in his dark eyes. He is a soldier in a world at war, now holding something entirely different. The sergeant remains on one knee amidst the wreckage of his own world, clutching the relic from another. He is a small figure in a vast, desolate landscape. The scene shifts to the fortified bunkers of the Northeast Asian front, where the fires of World War III continue to burn. The conflict shows no signs of ending. In the dim light of the bunker, Egan uses a pair of long tweezers to feed a mealworm to the small, lizard-like creature. The creature snaps at the food eagerly, its movements quick and predatory. Egan carefully drops another morsel into the creature's open maw, his gloved hand steady. Despite his heavy tactical gear, he handles the small beast with surprising precision. A soldier interrupts the quiet moment, calling out to Egan from the doorway of the cramped room. Egan flinches slightly at the sudden intrusion, his focus broken. Egan quickly secures the small creature within his vest as the soldier reports that repairs are complete. He stands, his rifle slung over his shoulder, ready to return to the field. Sergeant Lee Geon pulls on his tactical gloves, his eyes sharp and focused as he prepares for the mission. He tells his subordinate to inform the others of his departure. The view shifts down a narrow, reinforced tunnel as a soldier makes his way toward the surface. The muffled sounds of military activity echo through the concrete corridor. Outside, a group of soldiers has gathered around the unnamed civilian girl and her dog. They look up in surprise as Egan approaches the scene, his presence commanding immediate attention. One of the soldiers explains the situation, nodding that the girl came from the village at the foot of the mountain. She holds out two small, red packages, hopping to negotiate with the troops. The unnamed civilian girl stands her ground, her expression a mix of desperation and resolve as she offers the trade. Beside her, the small white dog looks on with equal intensity. She holds the packages out in one hand, her brow sweating as she explains she only wants to trade for some food. A small moth flutters nearby, drawn to the meager light of the camp. Egan stares down at her with a chilling, detached gaze, showing no sign of sympathy for her plight. He gives the curt command to send her back where she came from. Without a second look, Egan turns to walk away, leaving the girl and her dog standing in the center of the military outpost. The surrounding soldiers look on with varied expressions of unease. He moves past his men, his stride heavy and purposeful as he ignores the girl's presence. One soldier reaches out to pat the dog, looking apologetic for his commander's coldness. A hand reaches out and roughly grabs the girl's shoulder, stopping her from following Egan. She gasps, her mouth falling open in shock at the sudden physical intervention. The girl shouts after Egan as he walks away, her dog barking furiously at his retreating back. The other soldiers watch the interaction with wide-eyed surprise. From a safe distance, two soldiers gossip about Egan's lack of emotion, calling him ice-cold and inland steel. They watch as the girl and her dog remain stranded in the middle of the camp. The girl continues to berate Egan, calling him a monster born from war who lacks even a trace of human warmth. Egan ignores the insults, his back turned to her as he stops near a low wall. Egan reaches into one of the pouches on his tactical vest, his movements methodical and quiet. He continues to ignore the shouting girl entirely. The girl suddenly stops her tirade, her eyes widening in confusion as she sees what Egan is doing. Even her dog stops barking, looking up in curiosity at the soldier. Egan turns around and holds out his hands, which are overflowing with chocolates and energy bars. The ice-cold commander has chosen to provide exactly what the girl needed. The girl stands in stunned silence as Egan offers her the food, her earlier anger completely forgotten. A soldier comments that they wouldn't have survived this long without Egan's leadership. The unnamed civilian girl beams with a bright, genuine smile, her dog panting happily beside her. She wonders aloud what kind of life Egan had before the war began. Egan looks away, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, as if lost in a memory he can't quite grasp. The light of the setting sun catches the edge of his helmet. Nearby, two soldiers sit on the edge of a vehicle, happily munching on the extra chocolate bars Egan shared. Above them, a small surveillance drone hums through the air, watching the quiet moment. Its mechanical lens tracking its target as it releases a deadly projectile. Egan, a hardened soldier on the front lines of World War II, looks up in shock as the warning sirens scream across the trench. Reacting on instinct, Egan throws himself toward an unnamed civilian girl and her dog, desperately trying to shield them from the coming explosion. He sprints through the mud, his tactical boots churning up the earth as he races against time in the middle of the chaotic battlefield. His squad members cry out in terror, their voices lost in the sounds of distant gunfire and crumbling stone. "Lieutenant," they shout, but Egan's focus is entirely on the small figure caught in the open, his eyes wide with frantic determination. A massive impact shakes the ground, a blinding flash of light washing over everything as the world seems to tear apart for a split second. The soldiers scramble for cover, calling for an immediate retreat before they're completely wiped out by the incoming strike. Egan holds his ground, his rifle gripped tight as he provides covering fire while the heavy weight of leadership presses down on him. He pins the crying girl to the dirt, using his own body as a shield while he continues to fire at the unseen enemies through the haze. High above, the drone that launched the attack is obliterated, its debris falling like burning rain over the mud-slicked trenches. In this moment of life and death, Egan's mind drifts back to his life before the war, when he worked part-time at a local pet shop. Back then, his world was quiet and simple, spent carefully feeding a bearded dragon with a pair of long tweezers. Every living thing was precious to him. He could spend hours just watching the colorful fish drift peacefully in their tanks. Raising these helpless creatures was his only source of true happiness, a stark contrast to the destruction he deals in now. No matter how many battles he survives or how much respect he earns as a commander, the soldier feels a deep sense of disconnect. He's been honored with medals for his bravery, standing tall while his peers salute the decorated hero they think he is. But behind the mask and the uniform, Egan feels like a nobody, just a man pretending to be steel when his heart belongs to smaller things. As he shields the terrified girl, that old instinct to protect something vulnerable flares up with an intensity he can't ignore. He spots a strange, green object falling through the air and lunges for it, his hand reaching out as if to catch a falling star. He dives through the air, his rifle tossed aside as he prioritizes saving the helpless object over his own safety. The egg-shaped projectile lands firmly in his palm, but instead of detonating, it pulses with a mysterious, warm energy. Egan's pupils contract in shock as a brilliant, swirling light erupts from within the smooth shell of the object. He clutches the egg to his chest as the battlefield around him suddenly dissolves into a heavy, absolute darkness. When he finally comes to, Egan is collapsed on the ground in a vast, white void, his lungs burning as he gasps for air. Sweat drips from his forehead as he tries to process the impossible transition from a rainy trench to this sterile, empty dimension. His hands are still locked tight around the egg, the only thing keeping him grounded in this surreal new reality. He sits alone in the middle of the infinite nothingness, a small, camouflaged dot in a world that shouldn't exist. Egan looks down at the object in his hands, his brows furrowing in confusion as he realizes it wasn't a grenade at all. "It's a dud," he mutters, breathing a sigh of relief even as he wonders why this piece of junk brought him here. But then the egg begins to glow with an intense golden light, revealing ancient, swirling symbols carved into its surface. A massive voice suddenly thunders through the void, claiming to cast its shadow over the entire world. The declaration continues, vibrating through Egan's chest as the voice speaks of ruling over the primordial life of the swamps. A colossal, spectral form manifests behind the soldier, its glowing eyes and massive horns towering high above him in the silence. The Lord of Green identifies itself with an ancient authority, its voice vibrating through the very air as it addresses Egan directly. "Raise me," it commands, the sheer weight of its presence causing Egan to scramble back and drop the egg in pure shock. The dragon's slit-pupiled eyes widened, watching the soldier's movements with panic as the egg fell. The egg hits the ground with a soft thud, rolling away as Egan struggles to reconcile his military world with this mythical nightmare. The Lord of Green lets out a deafening roar, clearly offended that the man it chose would treat its precious body with such careless fear. Driven by pure reflex, Egan draws his pistol and fires, the muzzle flash lighting up the void as he tries to fight back against the impossible. The Lord of Green just mocks him, laughing at the primitive nature of human weapons and their total lack of understanding. It towers over the tiny soldier, declaring that its current form is the culmination of countless lives lived as the legendary Green Dragon. Egan looks down at the glowing egg on the floor of the void, the Lord of Green's voice booming as it dismisses his reality as a mere illusion. Without a word, Egan draws his pistol and racks the slide, the mechanical click echoing sharply through the oppressive silence. The dragon's arrogance instantly evaporates into a nervous sweat, its eyes widening as it realizes this primitive creature is armed and dangerous. Egan ignores the dragon's sudden change in tone, his eyes darting around the empty space as he questions where he is and if he's actually dead. He stands tiny and insignificant before the massive form of the Lord of Green, who confirms his darkest fear with a single, calm sentence. The dragon's massive jaws part, its glowing eyes fixed on the soldier as it admits that, yes, Egan has indeed crossed the threshold of life. Egan's first thought isn't for himself. but for the squad he led and the young civilian girl he tried so desperately to save from the blast. The Lord of Green lets out a booming laugh, mocking the soldier for worrying about trivial human lives after being granted a miraculous second chance. Egan looks back at the egg in his hand, the metal of his handgun gleaming as he tries to find logic in a world that has none. Sensing the shift in Egan's resolve, the dragon's demeanor softens, admitting that even it doesn't fully understand how they ended up here together. The Lord of Green's pupils narrow as it realizes Egan isn't the easy pushover it expected, but a man with a gaze of hardened steel. It reflects on how this human, instead of being crushed by its magnificent presence, managed to seize control of the situation in an instant. Egan kept his pistol pressed against the dragon egg, demanding to know why he had been dragged into this mystical nightmare against his will. The dragon explains that while it chose Egan, the actual transport to this dimension was far beyond its current weakened state. It recalls the agonizing moments of being cast into the dimension of death, adrift and dying after its defeat in its own world. It was a victim of the overwhelming spatial magic of the gold dragon, a power that tore through the boundaries of space and time. As its vision began to fade into the endless darkness of the void, the Lord of Green prepared to accept its final end. But then a sharp chime resonated through the emptiness, a sacred voice that pulled the dragon back from the brink of extinction. A divine prompt appeared, offering a way to survive and experience the features of another world alongside the legendary Big Three. The system commanded the dragon to select its breeder, showing a vision of Egan as he fell through the rift between worlds. The dragon explains that it needed someone to raise it, a chosen hero who would stand at its side and serve its needs. It watched Egan's selfless leap to catch the grenade, realizing he was the perfect candidate to serve as its guardian and caretaker. Egan possesses the cold, sharp strategic mind of the blue dragon, a trait that the Lord of Green immediately recognized. Combined with that, he carries the fierce, unyielding momentum of the red dragon, making him a warrior of rare potential. A brief memory of Egan's gentle hands feeding a tortoise back at the pet shop flickers through the void, highlighting his true nature. The Lord of Green watches him closely, more convinced than ever that its choice to name this soldier as its breeder wasn't a mistake. Egan mutters the strange terms under his breath, wondering what a sacred voice or the Big Three could possibly mean in a place like this. Another chime rings out, and a system window appears with a polite greeting, seemingly acknowledging Egan's arrival in this new realm. Egan reads the floating text aloud, still trying to wrap his head around the idea of using new features in a world that feels like a hallucination. The Lord of Green is struck with awe, recognizing the calm, measured tone as the voice of the Creator, the one who governs all existence and resources. As the dragon trembles at the presence of the divine, Egan ignores the spectacle and pulls out the rugged smartphone his commander left him. The Lord of Green is losing it, screaming about some wicked lizard that went and ruined the world's balance. Egan just stands there as a system window pops up, telling him it's time to pick a race. The first few options are pretty standard fantasy fare, like humans or dwarves. Even elves are an option, billed as the nobility of reflection. But the dragon isn't having it. He hates elves, basically saying the only good one is a dead one. He points Egan toward the orcs instead, calling them the proud warriors of the battlefield. Egan's a bit skeptical. Orcs, that's definitely a choice. Regardless, the system locks it in, race orc. He barely has a second to process what that even means. Since he picked a primitive race, the system dumps all the extra points into his stats, massively boosting his leadership and charisma. The dragon breeder skill kicks in, and the inheritance begins as light starts swirling around him. He's just standing there confused, wondering what the hell taming stats are supposed to mean. The Lord of Green puts everything he has left into a final burst of magic. He's banking on the green dawn, rising to take down the golden crown. He calls Egan a hero from another world, one who's perfectly in sync with the golden seal. His final request is for Egan to take his legacy and forge a fearless army. Egan just watches as the dragon's destiny is passed directly to him. The dragon's voice starts to fade out as the process reaches its conclusion. All that's left in the void is a single glowing green orb. Then a massive pillar of light erupts as the transfer officially begins. Egan thinks back to the moment he died on Earth, recalling his final desperate thought. He just wanted to live a life where he could raise something. Suddenly, he's thrown into a dark, bottomless abyss, falling through the void. He remembers his quiet days working at the pet shop, a world away from the war. He never really specified what he wanted to raise, though. As he sinks deeper into the darkness, he starts to lose consciousness. The system notes that the lizard he was carrying was just fed to a level 3 slime. It feels like he's sinking into a massive ocean as his tactical gear starts drifting away. That slime evolves into a mutant specimen after devouring his equipment. Even his pistol gets swallowed up by the encroaching shadows. The system confirms the evolution, a level 20 transforming gun. He keeps falling, completely helpless in the dark. Suddenly, he's gasping for air, feeling like he's actually drowning. He looks up and sees a full moon hanging in a starry night sky. He collapses on the forest floor, coughing up water and gasping for breath. A weird purple blob is sitting right there on the grass next to him. He picks up the little guy as it makes sounds, dookie, dookie. But then something feels very wrong, and he recoils in shock. He looks down at his hands, and they're covered in a strange, thick slime. That's when he realizes his body doesn't feel right at all. He stands up under the moonlight, and he's definitely not human anymore. Looking at his reflection, the blue skin and tusks finally start to sink in. Egan turns to look at Dookie, but the little slime is too busy munching on his tactical gloves. He's still trying to get used to his new blue skin and those tusks sticking out of his mouth. Panic starts to set in when he realizes almost all of his military gear has vanished. Dookie doesn't seem to care, just happily chewing away on the expensive fabric. The slime finally finishes off the glove, leaving Egan with next to nothing. He realizes this thing is a lot more dangerous than it looks. He figures his best bet is to make a run for it while the blob is busy eating. But as he tries to bolt, he almost trips over the glowing green dragon egg. He scoops it up, not wanting to leave the Lord of Green's legacy behind. Egan rolls the egg toward the little creature. Egan doesn't wait to find out and sprints into the dark forest, as fast as his new legs can carry him. He's gasping for breath, still reeling from the fact that his life has turned into a survival game. Just as he thinks he's in the clear, something flashes in the dark. An arrow zips right past his face, leaving a stinging cut on his cheek. He shouts in shock, looking back to see who's trying to hunt him. Suddenly, a goblin scout leaps from the shadows, brandishing a wicked-looking dagger. Egan is wide-eyed, completely caught off guard by the speed of the attack. In a moment of desperation, the little creature suddenly transformed and flew toward him. The little slime suddenly lunged forward, its body beginning to envelop Egan completely. There's a blinding flash of light as Dookie reacts to the danger. The goblin's blade was blocked, completely unable to pierce through the tactical armor that Dookie had just transformed into. That's when Dookie flows into Egan's hand, taking on a very familiar shape. The transformed slime skill activates, responding to his soldier instincts. With the skill online, the slime hardens into solid metal. It turns into a perfect replica of his K5 pistol, barrel aimed straight at the attacker. A single shot rang out, sending the goblin flying backward before it could even try anything else. Nearby, the other goblin scouts stood frozen in absolute terror as a loud bang echoed through the night. Miles away, an old man enjoys a quiet drink, completely oblivious to the chaos in the forest. Cilia, the elven scout, is already on the move, darting through the trees toward the source of the noise. She's focused, her sharp elven eyes scanning every shadow for the intruder. She lands light as a feather, her cape fluttering behind her as she closes in. She peers through the brush, trying to figure out what that loud bang was. Cilia stands tall, silver hair shimmering, as she prepares to investigate this new threat. Meanwhile, back at a hidden cave, the sound of birds and distant goblin chatter echoes. Inside, the two surviving scouts were punished with a military-style handstand. They're squirming and crying out, completely at the mercy of their captor. Egan looms over them, telling them to shut up in no uncertain terms. He gives them his best drill sergeant stare, asking who gave them permission to make noise. The goblins immediately freeze, shaking like leaves at the sight of the giant blue orc. Egan takes a moment to organize the few things he has left: his phone, the dragon egg, and some scavenged food. Dookie is back to being a harmless-looking blob, resting right on the makeshift table. Egan sits back and rubs his chin, trying to figure out how he's going to survive as an orc commander. He starts retracing the events that unfolded last night. Dookie leaps into action, spinning through the air toward Egan in a blur of blue and yellow. The little slime wraps itself around Egan's arm, its body glowing with an intense, magical light. A blinding flash erupts from the contact point, lighting up the dark forest. Egan is shocked as a goblin's blade bounces harmlessly off his vest, repelled by a sudden surge of energy. He watches in disbelief as Dookie's gelatinous form begins to reshape itself into something metallic and familiar. The transformed slime skill completes its work, molding the creature into a perfect replica of a K5 pistol. With the skill fully activated, the sight of the gun locks onto the target ahead. Egan's crimson eye narrows as he stares down the barrel, his tactical training taking over. His finger tightens on the trigger, engaging the fast-action mechanism. He fires, and a bolt of energy slams right into the lead goblin's open mouth. The blue goblin scout screams in terror as his partner falls, unable to process what just happened. Egan doesn't hesitate, spinning around and leveling his weapon at the remaining threat. He takes careful aim at the panicked blue scout, who is frozen in place. Two more shots ring out in quick succession, hitting the goblin square in the chest. The goblin doesn't even have time to scream before the force of the impact sends him flying. The blue creature crashes into the dirt, joining his comrade in a heap of defeated enemies. Both scouts are down, and Egan stands over them with the gun still raised, his breath coming in heavy gasps. Slowly, the K5 pistol begins to melt away as Dookie loses its rigid shape. The transformation takes a lot out of the little guy. Dookie slumps onto the ground with dizzying spirals in its eyes. Egan sits back and sighs, pulling out a small notebook to record his observations of Acting Sergeant Lee Geon. He notes that Dookie is friendly, but more importantly, it can transform into anything it consumes. However, there's a limit. It can only maintain the form until its energy runs dry. He estimates the firepower is roughly equal to rubber bullets, not quite enough for a real war. He glances over at the two goblins he's tied up, who are shivering in the corner of the cave. Egan looks down at his phone as it dings with a notification, wondering if there's any hope for a signal. Outside, the world remains a mystery, and Egan is left wondering what his next move should be. He checks the screen, but there's no suitable answer or map data to be found. He rubs his temples in frustration, the weight of his situation finally starting to sink in. Dookie seems much less concerned, busy poking and prodding at the large green dragon egg. Egan stares at the egg, recalling the massive dragon that entrusted him with this task. He remembers the Lord of Green's demand, to forge a fearless army and bring its body back to life. He realizes he was essentially hired as a mercenary by a godlike being for some unknown purpose. Egan turns to the captured scouts, hoping they might finally provide some useful information. The goblins are absolutely terrified, convinced that this giant blue orc is some kind of alien. "Where is this place?" Egan asks, but his voice only seems to scare them more. He bellows for them to answer, but the two creatures just cower on the ground, sobbing. Egan sighs, realizing he can't communicate with these native beings at all. He looks at Dookie hugging the egg, and decides that hatching it is his only real way to move forward. He stands up and adjusts his glove, ready to begin his new training in this hostile land. He knows that over-planning in a situation like this is just a recipe for disaster. His top priority is simple: survive long enough to find a safe base of operations. With his new prisoners in tow, Egan walks out of the cave to begin identifying threats and scouting the terrain. With a desperate cry of "Gobble!" The Green Goblin scout raises a heavy stone high above its head. The stone comes crashing down into the dirt as the two goblins work under Egan's watchful eye. Egan sits calmly on a nearby rock, observing the two natives as they continue their labor in the forest clearing. He realizes that the biggest threat right now isn't the environment, but the natives themselves and whatever group they belong to. He notes that the scouts were carrying enough rations for a single day, meaning their main camp must be nearby. Egan calls Dookie over, his mind racing with tactical calculations about the distance to the enemy's base. As the little slime bounces into his hand, Egan orders it to transform into the familiar shape of his K5 service pistol. He checks the slide of the slime gun, knowing that reinforcements could arrive at any moment, and he needs more intelligence. Egan decides to take a different approach, since the language barrier is making verbal communication impossible. He points his finger at a crude drawing he's made in the dirt, representing himself and the two goblins. He points to himself first, trying to establish a basic identity with the terrified prisoners. Lee Geon, he says clearly, hoping the name might stick as he points to the central figure in his drawing. The two scouts watch him intently, their large eyes filled with confusion and fear as they track his movements. He then points to the two smaller figures in the dirt, indicating that they represent the two scouts. Egan makes a sweeping gesture toward the surrounding forest, asking the million-dollar question, "Where are you from?" The Green Goblin scout perks up, pointing a finger into the distance and chirping out a single word, "Gobble." The scout becomes more animated, repeating the word over and over as if it's the answer to everything. The Green Goblin scout jumped in, shouting at its companion for revealing their hideout to a stranger. Egan immediately levels the K5 pistol at the blue scout's head, the sudden movement silencing them instantly. His expression is cold and businesslike, showing them that his patience has very real limits. "Don't talk," he commands, his voice low and dangerous as he stares them down. He indicates the drawing again, making it clear that they'll end up like the fallen figure if they don't cooperate. The threat is understood. He makes it clear that failure to provide answers will lead to a very painful end. Finally getting the message, the scouts point toward a distant ridge, whispering "Gobble" one last time in terror. Egan stares off at a distant ridge, realizing the trek is going to be a lot longer than he anticipated. Hidden in the brush, a pair of sharp yellow eyes watches his every move. To keep his new recruits cooperative, Egan offers up some chicken legs he found in their own bags as a reward. The Goblin scouts don't hesitate to dig in, tears streaming down their faces as they eat. They're mid-bite when something catches them completely off guard. A strange blue light suddenly erupts from the ground, surrounding the confused scouts. Nearby, a glowing smartphone sits next to a large, patterned egg, pulsing with energy. A smartphone floats in the center of a shimmering blue void, its screen radiating a blinding white light. A bizarre notification pops up, displaying a combat log of one goblin warrior striking another with a specialized move. It looks like a generic mobile game, but here, it's the only sign of life. The light intensifies as the system confirms Egan has successfully tamed the level 3 goblin. Along with the new subordinates, Egan suddenly gains the ability to understand their demonic language. Watching from a distance, Celia is frozen in disbelief at the scene unfolding. She doesn't stick around to see more, vanishing in a blur of speed. She quickly used her telepathic ability to report everything she had just witnessed to the authorities in the capital. Towering elven elders look down on her, demanding she state her business. Kneeling before them, she reports spotting an anomaly near a human village at the forest's edge. She drops the bombshell. She found an orc wielding high-level dragon taming magic. Celia describes seeing the massive blue orc standing over his captured scouts in the clearing. The image of the orc holding a metallic weapon, while the goblin's cower is etched in her mind. The elders find the idea of an orc using dragon magic completely ridiculous. Celia doesn't flinch, standing by her report with a firm affirmative. A heavy silence falls over the grand hall as the elders process her claim. One of them brings up her past, reminding Celia she's the one who can't even draw a bow anymore. Celia tries to ground the conversation in facts, nodding it's been 150 years since the last dragon reckoning. The elder just chuckles, clearly not taking her seriously. He dismisses her observations as the reckless ideas of a younger generation. Celia's jaw drops. She can't believe they're just brushing off a potential world-ending threat. They turn their attention to a new arrival, Callian Aramate, the Son of Light. Callian strides into the room, his presence immediately commanding the space. The elder passes the buck, asking Callian if he's failing to keep his subordinates in line. Callian doesn't pull any punches, asking Celia if her claim even makes sense to her. He dismisses the council, suggesting they all meet up behind the mother tree later. With a final scolding to handle things at her own level, the glowing elders begin to fade away. Once they're gone, Callian lets out a weary sigh, rubbing his temples. He softens his tone slightly, acknowledging Celia's deep-seated hatred for the green dragon. He reminds her that the dragon's magic was supposedly wiped out completely. A vision of the gold dragon's absolute destruction of the green dragon flashes through the air. To Callian, suggesting an orc is now using that dead magic is nothing short of blasphemy. Celia tries to argue that there was more to it, but her voice falters. Callian snaps at her, furious that she brought such nonsense directly to the High Council. He pulls rank, demanding she stand down and remember the chain of command. Celia bites her lip and submits, giving a quiet confirmation. She storms out of the hall, clutching her head as the weight of the dismissal sinks in. Celia slams her fist down in a fit of rage, refusing to let the elder's insults go. She screams that she knows what she saw, and it was undeniably the green dragon's magic. Her fury boils over as she vows to wipe out every trace of the lizard that maimed her and took her arm. She's determined to prove them all wrong and reclaim her honor, no matter what it takes. Back in the dark forest, nature's brutality is on full display as a massive, multi-eyed bear creature ambushes its prey. The predator slams a bird-like monster into the dirt, showing no mercy. From the safety of a ridge, Egan and his new goblin companions watch the hierarchy of the forest play out. A giant land crustacean trundles past, its heavy shell scraping against the ground. To the goblins, every nightmare creature they see is just another potential meal. The bear creature lets out a bone-chilling roar that echoes through the trees. It looms over the landscape, a reminder of the constant danger lurking in the shadows. The goblins explain that they were supposed to bring back proof of a kill like that for their coming-of-age trial. Because they were too terrified to do it, their tribe kicked them out and left them for dead. They don't seem to mind much now, though, since they believe they've found their new master of green. Egan tries to set the record straight, telling them he isn't their master and that he's just as spooked by this place as they are. They won't hear it, insisting that they're all demonkin together and belonging on the same side. They reach out to touch his arm, marveling at the similarities between their skin. Egan watches, stunned, as these small creatures find kinship in him despite his size. To them, the color of their skin doesn't matter. They're all children of the forest. As night falls, Egan builds a fire to keep the predators at bay. He sits by the flames, documenting everything he's learned about this strange world in his journal. He notes the behaviors of the bear monsters he saw earlier in the day. He sketches out the land crustaceans, categorizing the various threats they face. It's a survival guide for a world that seems determined to kill him. He thinks back to his life on Earth, where he spent his days gently caring for reptiles in a quiet pet shop. It's a far cry from his current reality, where his companions are already passed out and drooling in the dirt. Egan stares into the distance, the weight of his new life starting to sink in. He closes his eyes for a moment, trying to find some peace in the quiet of the night. But the crackling of the fire starts to sound like something else. The flames dance and flare up, triggering a memory he can't escape. Suddenly, the forest is gone, replaced by the inferno of a battlefield, and the moment everything was taken from him. An emergency alert blares from a phone screen on the ground, warning of missiles and urging immediate evacuation. Egan's eye snaps open, trembling with fear as a tear rolls down his face. In a nightmare of the past, he's back in Seoul, kneeling amidst fire and ruins as missiles rain down from the sky. The sound of a snapping twig pulls him back to the present. Egan gasps, his heart still racing from the dream. He immediately reached out and grabbed Dookie, startling the little creature. Egan whips his pistol toward the darkness, demanding to know who's there. Two human scouts freeze in the firelight, looking completely terrified at the sight of him. The humans stand their ground, shivering as they stare across the campfire at the blue-skinned orc. Egan lowers his weapon slightly, shocked to see people who actually look like him, or at least how he used to look. The older scout draws his sword, shouting something in a language that sounds like total gibberish. Egan tries to calm them down, but he can't understand a word they're saying. Suddenly, the goblins lunge from the shadows, eyes glowing red as they charge the scouts. Egan yells for them to stop, but the monsters aren't listening. A foot slams into the dirt with incredible force. A blur of white and green streaks through the air. Cilia Tuscarora arrives like a lightning bolt, her blade cutting through the air. She weaves through the chaos, knocking the goblins away before they can even react. With a sharp and fluid motion, the elf raised her long, slender leg high. She brought her leg down on a goblin, sending a shockwave rippling across the clearing. Cilia lands perfectly, the force of her impact kicking up a cloud of dust. Egan and Gobble stare in disbelief at the sudden intrusion. She glares at them over her shoulder, her expression cold and lethal. Cilia draws her sword, calling them filthy monsters as she prepares to strike. She steps forward, introducing herself as the gleaming fang of light. Her golden eyes narrow as she makes her name known. Looking at the orc and the goblins, she declares she's going to wipe them from existence. She stands her ground, ready to deliver a fatal blow. Egan is just left standing there, completely lost. The elf continues her speech, but to Egan, it's just a bunch of angry-sounding noise. He holds up his hands, trying to signal that they're done fighting. To Cilia, though, his attempt at peace just sounds like the guttural growls of an orc. She orders the humans to stay back, convinced the monster is trying to cast a spell. The scouts retreat as the elf prepares for a magical showdown. Egan decides a warning shot is the only way to cool everyone down before someone dies. He pulls the trigger, but only a hollow click echoes through the forest. Egan stares at his gun in total shock. He checks the magazine well, only to find it completely empty. Dookie floats there, looking utterly exhausted and out of material. The spare mags dissolve back into useless slime right in front of his eyes. Cilia's eyes glow with lethal intent as she realizes her enemy is wide open. Cilia zips through the air, diving down toward her target with lethal intent. She grips her blade tightly, her eyes locked on the monsters below. With one swift motion, she pointed her blade straight at a goblin. The human scouts could only watch in horror as blood splattered everywhere. Egan managed to block the elf's blade just before it could send the little goblin to its grave. Cilia's eyes widen as she realizes her blow didn't take him out instantly. Egan's arm is sliced open, blood spraying as he holds the blade back with sheer grit. He grits his teeth, forcing himself to stay focused through the searing pain. Egan lets out a roar as he begins his counterattack. Egan unleashed a thunderous punch toward the elf. The elf gasped, completely stunned that an orc could be this fast. Egan remains focused, his eye locked on her every move as he reaches for his weapon. She let out another cry as Egan shoved the gun barrel straight into her mouth. The strike sent Cilia flying backward, but she quickly regained her balance as she glided across the grass, resetting her stance. Breathless, she glares at Egan, unable to believe he's still standing after her barrage. She can't stand the thought of a lowly monster actually managing to touch her. Calling on the wind spirits, she prepares to unleash her full power to end the fight. Egan collapses to one knee, the toll of the struggle finally catching up to him. Blood drips steadily from his mangled hand, staining the dirt a deep red. Gobble trembles behind him, calling out to his master in total fear. Egan curses as his hand refuses to cooperate, the pain flaring with every movement. He stares at his trembling fingers, realizing his arm is practically useless now. The goblin begs him to run, but Egan just tells him to get out of there while he can. He promises to buy enough time for the little guy to make his escape. Despite the injury, he fumbles with his gear for a fresh magazine to reload. His movements are clumsy as he fights through the mounting agony. He slams the new mag home, the mechanical click giving him a brief moment of hope. Egan pushes himself forward, refusing to go down without a final stand. Cilia charges back in, her sword glowing with lethal, wind-charged energy. She's a blur of motion as Egan tries to track her through his iron sights. She pauses for a split second, surprised by the orc's stubborn persistence. Another slash connects, sending Egan reeling back into the dirt once again. He realizes just how outmatched he is by her incredible speed. Dookie is visibly exhausted on the weapon, the slime barely holding its shape together. Egan knows he only has one shot left before the weapon completely fails. Cilia circles him like a predator, her movements almost impossible to follow. He drops into a steady firing stance, waiting for the perfect window to pull the trigger. He steels himself, ignoring the blood loss and the looming threat of the elf. She lunges for the kill, her blade coming down in a devastating vertical arc. A flash of light erupts as they clash one last time in the middle of the clearing. Nearby, a goblin watches the explosion of violence, completely paralyzed by fear. Gobble trembles as he holds a glowing, golden crescent-shaped artifact, wondering where on earth it just fell from. He stares at the ornate gold piece, his hands shaking from the intensity. Cilia is sprawled on the ground, her eyes wide with utter disbelief. She lies motionless in the grass, the fight seemingly knocked out of her. Egan stands over her, breathing heavily as he looks at his ruined weapon. The gun simply disintegrates, falling to the earth in a shower of slime. On his knees, Egan looks down at Gobble, who is sobbing uncontrollably. Gobble wails, reaching for the melted remains of Dookie on the forest floor. The slime is a liquid mess, dripping through Gobble's green fingers. Egan's expression is one of hollow shock as he watches the companion dissolve. His mind flashes back to holding his dying platoon leader on a battlefield. In the vision, Egan weeps over the body amidst smoke and flames. A digital prompt appears, noting a severe mental shift in the orc. The smartphone screen flickers with a grim diagnosis, PTSD. The system announces the activation of a dormant, primal orc ability. Egan lets out a soul-shaking roar as the berserker skill takes hold. His face contorts into a mask of rage, eyes burning with white light. Shrouded in a violent aura, he towers over the cowering Gobble. A monstrous hand reaches out, crackling with dark, overwhelming energy. He plants his boot firmly on the grass, ready to unleash his fury. Egan stands tall, transformed into a nightmare of black smoke and red light. Cilia looks up from the ground, paralyzed by the sheer malice. He glares at her, his humanity buried under the weight of trauma. A quiet vision shows a human, Egan, kneeling beside a small creature. In the present, the berserker Egan slowly turns his head. His glowing eye narrows as he spots something moving in the grass. He looks down to find a tiny, rejuvenated Dookie staring back. The little slime chirps its name, a small beacon in the darkness. Egan stands amid slime puddles as the dark aura begins to recede. The system detects that the slime has undergone a miraculous transformation. A grainy image of his old platoon leader appears on the phone screen. A new spiky yellow slime named Pino pops into existence. A third soft pink slime named Sini emerges, looking timid. The system explains that Dookie has split through a sexual division. Egan stands awkwardly as the three little slimes cling to him. His face returns to normal, though he looks completely haunted. Cilia remains on the ground, staring up at the orc with fear. The scene shifts to a vast white void where a lone elf girl sits. She looks around the empty expanse, wondering where she is. A terrifying, dark monster face flashes across her vision like a nightmare. She recoils in horror, her eyes wide as she processes the image. Desperate, she scrambles to her feet, intent on delivering a report. Cilia is frantic, realizing she must inform the council about the dangerous orc shaman. Panic takes hold as she clutches her head, her situation spiraling out of control. Shock washes over her as she realizes her tiara, her primary communication link, is missing. She feels a crushing sense of despair as her connection to her people is severed. For the first time in 150 years, the proud elf feels utterly and completely alone. Her mental world begins to fracture and crumble into jagged shards of white and black. Cilia falls into a dark abyss, crying out in terror as she loses her footing. She screams for help, her voice filled with a primal and childlike desperation. She pleads for the Mother Tree and Lord Callion, terrified of being left behind. A monstrous maw opens beneath her, but she is suddenly caught by a pair of strong arms. Trapped in her nightmare, she begs the mysterious savior to help her escape. A human man with a gentle expression holds her close, providing a sudden sense of peace. He looks into her eyes with a soothing gaze, telling her that she no longer needs to fear. Cilia stares up at him in wonder, absorbing the comforting promise that she is safe. He offers her a bowl of glowing purple liquid, claiming it will clear her head. She is mesmerized by the kindness in his voice, finding it strangely familiar and soothing. The physical sensation of his touch anchors her, sending a jolt of warmth through her. She drinks the liquid, overwhelmed by the first genuine warmth she has felt in over a century. A system prompt appears, announcing an attempt to tame the high-level elf Cilia. A vision of a masked soldier appears, identified by the system as the instructor. He explains that he can be an angel or a demon, depending entirely on her own actions. The vision fades as Egan, back in his orc form, asks if she finally feels more like herself. The nearby goblins look at Cilia as if they could eat her alive, while Egan explains the impressive potency of the medicinal slime to her. Cilia sputters and coughs, spitting out the sticky purple residue as she returns to the harsh reality. In a hazy dream, Cilia finds herself being held by a handsome, more human-like version of her captor, as a flash of magic erupts between them. The vision fades away, replaced by the quiet morning air and birds circling over the distant mountains. Back in the real world, she's tied up in a sack, and she is absolutely livid, screaming for someone to let her out. She rants about wiping out every monster she sees, while Egan just stands there rubbing his neck, looking like he's completely over the drama. He peers down at her, totally unimpressed, and tells her she's being way too noisy for a prisoner. Before she can finish her next threat, her mouth magically snaps shut, leaving her muffled and frustrated. A strange magical pressure slams her down to the ground. She realizes with a shock that she's being held down by body control magic. She can't believe a lowly orc managed to cast high-level magic like this without her even noticing. Her body forces her into a kneeling position against her will, while Egan just stares at her, looking pretty confused himself. The goblins are having the time of their lives, cheering for their master for taming a stuck-up pointy-ear. Egan's just as surprised as she is, wondering if he really did that just by thinking it. He pulls out his rugged phone to see if the system is going to explain any of this. Rewinding a bit, the goblins brought over a bowl of goblin medicine, basically a bowl of pink sludge with an eyeball floating in it. They insist it's the pride of goblin medicine and totally guaranteed to work. Egan looks at the gross soup, then at the unconscious elf, and starts feeling a bit bad about what he's about to feed her. The goblins egg him on, saying they need her healthy so they can kill her properly later. He forces the potion down her throat, but the system pings with a failure. The taming didn't take. Her elven, lofty will is too strong for a mental takeover, so the system shifts gears to body control instead. The prompt confirms body control is a success, and as a bonus, Egan starts picking up the basics of the elven language. Egan starts reflecting on the concept of taming and how it actually works in this new world. He remembers training his pet gecko back on Earth. It's basically the same thing, just with more magic involved. He looks over at his goblin subordinates and wonders if he's technically tamed them the same way. He decides to test it out with a simple command, "Sit!" Both the elf and the goblin drop to the ground instantly. He tells them to stand, and they both pop back up like they're on strings. One more sit just to be sure, and they're both back in the dirt. He tells Cilia she can speak now, and the magical gag finally lifts. She immediately goes back to screaming, calling him a filthy shaman and swearing she'd rather die than be humiliated like this. He's had enough of the yelling and commands her to be quiet. Her tongue just hangs out, frozen in place. Watching her struggle, Egan realizes he has absolute control over her physical movements now. He starts wondering if this is a hidden ability he gained when he was first dragged into this world. He flashes back to the moment he fell through the abyss, his human body glowing with strange energy. He remembers being wounded and near death back on Earth, clutching his gun while bleeding out in a war zone. Then he recalls that terrifying moment he blacked out, when he transformed into a dark, powerful beast. A clawed shadow had taken over his form, fueled by a rage he couldn't control. It was his PTSD manifesting as a berserker state on the battlefield, turning him into a monster. Back in the present, Egan looks rattled as the memories of that bloodlust come flooding back. He wipes his face, trying to convince himself that it was all just the stress of the situation. He takes a seat on a log, finally letting the weight of his new reality sink in while his weird little squad watches him. He stares at his phone again, reminding himself that no matter how crazy this world gets, his mission hasn't changed. He looks at a photo of a comrade from his old life. He has unfinished business back home, and he's going to survive at any cost. He stands up with a renewed focus and shouts the one command that will turn this group into a unit: fall in. Egan stands tall in a full-blown military stance, barking out the command. The slimes and goblins don't waste a heartbeat, scrambling to fall into line right in front of their new commander. He stares them down, making it clear that he doesn't trust their loyalty yet. But he's giving them exactly one chance to prove they can handle being part of his unit. Egan addresses his new recruits. He tells them that in his world, survival is earned through overwhelming strength and willpower. The goblins and slimes listen intently. He promises to teach them how to grow stronger, but only if they prove they have the right to live. Standing over the squad, the sergeant lays out the terms. In exchange for his training, they will help him survive this world and eventually get him home. He drops into a push-up, leading the grueling physical drills. Sweat drips from the goblins as they struggle to keep up with his pace. The training moves into the forest for a long-distance run. Egan stays on their heels, barking orders to keep the unit moving. He grabs one of the exhausted goblins by the head. He warns them that anyone who falls behind isn't worthy of his leadership or their lives. The focus shifts to combat. Egan squares off with a goblin, knives out, teaching them how to strike with precision instead of raw aggression. Ciliatus Corella watches the brutal demonstration from her place on the ground. She sees a goblin take a heavy blow and realizes these aren't just mindless beasts. The elven warrior is visibly shaken. She admits to herself that she was wrong. These creatures are operating with a level of discipline she's never seen. Dookie's body warps and stretches, transforming into a functional handgun. Cilia stares at the logic-defying sight, unable to process what she's seeing. The goblins begin outfitting themselves with strange, foreign equipment. They strap on tactical vests and adjust their gear under the sergeant's watchful eye. Egan stands in his full military kit, a dark cloak draped over his armor. Beside him, his goblins now look like a professional tactical squad. A close-up of Egan's face shows his cold, unwavering gaze. He carries the weight of a soldier's life, and his resolve is visible in his red eyes. Cilia can only watch in stunned silence. In her 150 years as an elf, she has never encountered anything like this unit. One of the goblins practices its reload, letting an empty magazine fall to the dirt. The mechanical precision is a complete departure from their primitive nature. Egan watches as the goblins aim their firearms at the targets ahead. They aren't just shooting wildly, they're learning to become marksmen. Bullets tear through the wooden targets with clinical efficiency. The air is thick with the smell of gunpowder and the sound of rapid fire. Cilia's face goes pale with realization. She isn't looking at a monster, she's looking at a commander who has mastered the art of war. She spots her golden tiara sitting atop a pile of bags nearby. It's her only link to the Elf Council and her only chance to report this threat. Bound by Egan's command magic, she tries to crawl toward the artifact. Her body trembles with the effort as she desperate to reach it. Her fingers are inches away from the gold. Just as she thinks she might make it, a large hand looms over her from behind. Egan pins her down, his presence overwhelming. He leans in and tells her that the time for her to sit and wait is over. It's her turn to move. In a nearby village, a man yells about a monster in the mountains. He looks panicked, his eyes wide as he tries to warn his neighbors. The villagers gather in the square, looking skeptical. The man is frustrated, pleading with them to believe his story about the orc he saw. The village chief leans on his staff, looking weary. He dismisses the man's claims, calling the talk of orcs nothing but nonsense. The witness insists he saw an orc shaman, a beast so powerful that even a seasoned elf warrior was helpless against it. He begs the chief to notify the local lord or form a militia immediately. Little does he know, glowing eyes are already watching from the brush. The chief remains stubborn, scoffing at the idea that orcs would ever travel this far just to bother a tiny backwater village. Egan watches the scene from the shadows, his goblin squad positioned and ready. He listens to the villagers' dismissal with a cold, calculated look. The townspeople go about their business around the well, completely unaware of the lethal unit observing them from just yards away. Egan looks down at his captive elf. He gives Cilia a direct order to step forward and prepare to act as his voice. Cilia snaps back with a defiant glare, refusing to take orders from him. Egan just holds up a finger and tells her to be quiet. The villagers continue to argue, their language a mystery to the sergeant. He turns back to Cilia and asks her to interpret for him. She starts to scream a refusal, but the words die in her throat when she sees what Egan is holding. He dangles her golden tiara in front of her. He calls it a mental tool and asks her if he got the name tiara right. Egan admits he doesn't care for its history, but he knows it's precious to her. He tells her he's willing to give it back for a price. He gestures to the 3 hungry slimes waiting at his feet. He notes that the slimes seem to want some compensation for being split apart. He holds the artifact over the slimes' open mouths. He tells Cilia he'll give her a moment to think about his offer before she loses it forever. The sergeant raises his hand and starts the countdown. Cilia stares at the gold, her mind racing as her pride battles her desperation. He drops a finger to count down to 2. Cilia watches him, her breath hitching as the slimes inch closer to her treasure. Egan hits 1. Dookie lunges forward, tongue out and ready to dissolve the ancient elven relic in an instant. Cilia screams for him to stop, finally breaking and agreeing to his terms. Egan gives the signal to begin, and the unit starts its advance on the village. Cilia watches Egan with narrow eyes, thinking that only a monster would use such underhanded tactics. She's already planning her revenge once she gets her hands back on her artifact. She vows that the moment her tiara's remote hunting relay is active, the sergeant will face the eternal hatred of the elven people. Her gaze is fixed and full of venom. In the village square, the elder tries to calm a panicking resident. He explains that orcs are only common across the sea on the Sulcata continent, not here. He insists that the most they ever see in these parts are goblins and kobolds. He dismisses the talk of orcs as nothing more than tall tailies. The witness in the green hat shouts back, claiming he saw the beast with his own eyes. The man standing next to him looks equally terrified. He begs the elder to form a militia before it's too late. As he speaks, a large, armored boot steps into the frame, belonging to someone who was listening in. A group of mercenaries enters the square, their leader asking if the villagers don't trust their local guild. The atmosphere shifts instantly from panic to dread. Haremd, the leader of the road keepers, smirks as he rests a hand on his sword. He reminds everyone that every alley and crossroad is under his guild's protection. He stands tall in his fur-lined cloak, questioning why they would need a militia if they aren't planning on causing trouble. The villagers look small and defenseless beside him. The witness isn't backing down, accusing the guild of having a dirty conscience. He's fed up with their threats and extortion. The villager calls them out as a bandit gang that has seized every road just to extort tolls. Haremd's smug expression begins to twitch with irritation. Haremd loses his patience, claiming that people barely scraping by on textiles shouldn't talk back. He winds up a punch, his knuckles cracking. A heavy fist connects with the villager's face, sending him spinning toward the ground. The force of the blow is enough to knock the man's hat clean off. The witness grovels in the dirt, pleading for the mercenary to stop. The elder watches in horror, unable to intervene. Haramd leans down and grabs the man by his tunic, his face inches away. He tells the villager he needs to rein himself in if he wants to keep his teeth. Egan and Cilia watch the assault from the safety of the foliage. Cilia is disgusted, calling Egan a monster for just standing there while an innocent man suffers. Egan ignores the insult and draws his weapon. He gives Dookie a simple order: use non-lethal force to break up the party. The goblin marksman takes aim as Haramd prepares to land another strike. The mercenary is laughing, completely unaware he's in someone's sights. Haramd screams for the man to clamp his teeth down. Just as he swings, a sharp crack echoes through the square. A non-lethal round clips Haramd's cheek, the impact snapping his head back violently. The sudden force sends him stumbling away from his victim. Haramd crashes to the ground, stunned and bleeding. The villagers are frozen in shock at the invisible strike that just leveled the mercenary leader. The panicking witness points toward the forest, screaming that the sound was the orc shaman's roar. The villagers scramble for cover as the noise rings in their ears. Egan lowers his handgun, noting that even though he aimed at the ground, the shot still clipped the target. He tells Dookie to tighten up the precision for the next round. He declares the reconnaissance mission a success. He gives the order to the goblins and Cilia to break contact and fall back immediately. Cilia looks bewildered by the sudden withdrawal. Egan doesn't offer an explanation, simply telling her to move out as they disappear into the deep brush. A yellow, long-necked beast suddenly emerges from the trees, letting out a piercing screech. The Majorarius has spotted the squad and isn't letting them leave. Egan barks an order to Green. The goblin, wearing a brown helmet, pivots instantly to engage the attacking monster. He then calls for Blue and Gobble to move into position. The blue-skinned goblin scout sprints forward, his modern handgun raised and ready. Green leads the charge, delivering a powerful tactical kick to the lizard's chest. The impact stuns the creature, keeping it from lunging at the rest of the unit. Blue slides into the opening, the Majorarius snapping its jaws inches from his face. The goblin doesn't flinch, maintaining his focus on the beast's movements. Muzzle flashes illuminate the forest floor as Gobble and Blue open fire. They use synchronized bursts to suppress the monster, while Green provides close-quarters support. Blue reloads his weapon with practiced ease, utilizing IPSC shooting techniques he learned from the sergeant. He keeps his eyes on the target even as he swaps the magazine. The Majorarius reels back, its neck stretching as it shrieks in pain. The tactical fire is working, overwhelming the creature with a volume of attacks it can't handle. A close-up of the monster's eye shows it narrowing in a mixture of pain and confusion. It's never encountered prey that fights with such cold, mechanical coordination. The beast tries to find purchase on the ground with its talons, digging into the dirt as it prepares for another strike. Dust and leaves kick up around its feet. Blue ducks under a tail swipe, the wind of the attack whistling over his head. He stays low, preparing to deliver a point-blank shot into the beast's soft underbelly. Gobble lets out a guttural cry as he keeps his sights fixed on the target. He fires another suppressed round, the casing ejecting cleanly from the chamber. The bullet connects with the lizard's throat, forcing its head up. The creature is completely exposed, its defense shattered by the relentless pressure. Green leaps into the air, drawing a tactical knife from his vest. He moves with a speed and grace that completely belies his small stature. Blue follows suit, his own blade catching the light as he closes the distance. The two goblins move in a pincer maneuver, leaving the beast no room to escape. A precise slash opens a deep wound on the Majorarius's flank. Blood splatters across the leaves as the monster begins to lose its footing. The blade sinks deep into the monster's hide as it lets out a pained rasp. The unit has completely neutralized the threat, standing over their fallen foe with weapons drawn. The goblin operative expertly spins a bone-handled tactical knife, his movements fluid and practiced as he prepares for another drill. Training in this new world requires precision and absolute focus. With a swift, blinding strike, the goblin drives the blade into the side of the Majorarius carcass. He uses his other hand to pin the creature's back, ensuring the kill stroke is deep and final. Another goblin stands over the lizard's head, blade gleaming under the forest canopy. The combat system Egan taught them, Muset SOG and PSD, is far more effective than anything these creatures had ever known. The goblins stand unified, their modern tactical vests and masks a stark contrast to the wild terrain. They've fully integrated Krav Maga and other close-quarters combat tactics into their raiding maneuvers. Egan watches his units celebrate their clean victory over the beast, their cheers echoing through the trees. As the war in his original world dragged on, he saw firsthand how quickly manpower could vanish. Instructors from every sector, civilian, military, and police, had to step up to fill the gaps in the ranks. They were all driven by a singular, desperate conviction to survive the meat grinder. Egan's mind flashes back to his world, where experienced soldiers drilled raw recruits in a specialized combat system. The goal was simple: teach the conscripted youth enough to make it back from the front lines in one piece. The training didn't care about background. Whether they were active duty, reservists, or emergency responders, everyone was forged in the same fire. Firefighters and medical personnel stood alongside the infantry. Every member of society did their part, which allowed Egan and his fellow soldiers to survive on the battlefield. He adjusts his tactical mask, his eyes hard with the weight of those memories. Survival is a complex machine that requires quality food, clothing, and shelter to function properly. Without the support of a civilized society, a soldier's strength quickly withers away to nothing. In the camp, Gobble meticulously bandages the forearm of the blue goblin scout. Egan observes them, knowing that sleepless nights and constant operations will eventually erode even the toughest fighting power. He assesses the unit's current state as they rest in the clearing. If they truly intend to take over a village, they need to be in peak physical and tactical condition. Egan looks toward the goblins and Celia, who sits a short distance away in her dark cloak. He is calculating their odds, weighing the raw talent of his recruits against the challenge ahead. The goblins have adapted to the training with a speed that surprises even Egan. Hardened by the harsh realities of the wilderness, they've absorbed modern squad tactics as if born to them. Dookie and the other slimes are practicing their own transformations nearby. They've reached a point where they can mimic multiple complex tools simultaneously, enhancing the unit's utility. The slimes have mastered the internal mechanics of firearms, now capable of holding and firing 25 rounds across 2 magazines. Egan rests a hand on the snout of the tamed Majorarius. To trigger the taming ability, Egan had to establish clear hierarchy discipline through proper feeding. The lizard looks up at him, its once-wild eyes now calm and submissive. The Majorarius swallows a large piece of meat as the taming confirmation appears above it. It has successfully been brought under the unit's control as a heavy asset. Egan officially names the beast Q as the goblins eagerly climb onto its back. Celia watches from the side, her face pale as she sees the monster being treated like a common pack horse. The squad is now mounted on Q, the beast thundering through the forest with terrifying speed. Egan believes they finally have enough firepower to execute small-scale operations. However, Egan knows there is still one glaring hole in their operational capability. He stares at his ruggedized smartphone, the screen dark and useless without a signal. Long-range communication is essential for the complex tactics he wants to run. Without a proper comm system, his ability to command the squad from a distance is severely limited. Egan stands in thought, his hand to his chin as he considers how to bridge this gap. He knows that with coordination, their unit would be nearly unstoppable. Celia steps forward, her face flushed with anger as she confronts the sergeant. She shouts that she and the others have done everything he asked of them. She demands the return of her elven tiara, her hand outstretched. Egan blinks, momentarily distracted from his strategic planning. Egan reaches into a pouch and pulls out the golden artifact. He holds it up, the late afternoon light glinting off its polished surface. Celia's expression shifts to a triumphant, manic grin as she reaches for her treasure. She thinks she finally has the means to call for help and end this nightmare. Egan holds the tiara just out of her reach, asking why she is so obsessed with this little trinket. He studies the artifact, suspecting there's more to it than simple jewelry. Celia's breath hitches as she realizes Egan might be onto her. Her mind flashes back to the tactical maneuvers the goblins and slimes performed earlier. She finally recognizes that the squad's behavior wasn't just primitive monsters brawling. It was a cold, calculated display of military training. A close-up of Cilia reveals her growing dread. She knows she has to inform the Elf Grand Council about this orc and his strangely disciplined unit. She glares at Egan, her resolve hardening. If she can just get the tiara active, she can summon reinforcements to crush him and his magic tools once and for all. Cilia tries a different tactic, claiming with a trembling voice that the tiara was a keepsake from her late mother. She begs him to be honest and return it. She continued her plea, hoping Egan's sense of honor or pity would prevail. But under the influence of the potion, she spilled the truth. She was actually counting on the device's long-range hunting relay to broadcast her coordinates to the Elven Society. The two stand in a silent standoff in the middle of the clearing. Egan stares at her with a neutral expression, his silence unnerving the Elven captive. Cilia clenches her teeth, a single tear rolling down her cheek. She curses her helplessness, her frustration boiling over as Egan remains unmoved by her story. Egan repeats her words under his breath, focusing on the phrase long-range hunting relay. A sudden realization flashes across his features. He holds the tiara up to the light, turning it over in his hand. He asks her directly if this is the piece of gear her people use for long-distance communication. Cilia's eyes go wide with panic as Egan's hand moves toward his own forehead. She realizes too late that she may have just given him the solution to his comms problem. With a decisive movement, Egan snaps the golden tiara onto his own brow. The artifact fits perfectly, a strange fusion of elven craftsmanship and modern tactical gear. Cilia is frozen in absolute disbelief, her mouth hanging open as she watches her most precious relic being claimed by an orc. Her mind reels from the utter blasphemy of the act. She lets out a desperate scream of no as she reaches toward Egan's back. He doesn't even turn around, his focus already shifting to the newfound capabilities the tiara might provide. A brilliant flash of light erupts as Egan places the golden tiara on his head, triggering the artifact's latent magical properties. The boundary between physical and spiritual space begins to blur. In a white, ethereal void, Egan stands alongside a tall, regal elf. This is Callian Aramate, the Son of Light, appearing as a spiritual projection linked to the artifact. The two stand back-to-back in the mental space, a strange juxtaposition of orcish brawn and elven grace. Callian remains focused on his own realm, oblivious to the presence of the intruder in his communication link. A close-up of Callian Aramate reveals his sharp, aristocratic features and the thin scar running down his left eye. His heterochromatic eyes glow with a cold, piercing light as he waits for a report. Egan touches the circlet, his expression one of skepticism as he realizes the magic of the item is merely a high-tech communication relay. He seems unimpressed by the elven technology. After staring into the void for a while, Egan only saw a vast, empty whiteness. Nothing's happening, he muttered. The elven lord started at the strange voice, spinning around only to find no one there, as Egan had already logged out of that mental space. Cilia, Callian calls out, his brow furrowing as the connection continues to flicker and fail. He senses a disturbance in the mana flow that shouldn't be possible. Back in the forest clearing, Cilia is in a state of frantic disbelief. She screams at Egan, shocked that her distress signal didn't reach the Grand Council as she had planned. Egan holds the tiara casually in his hand, having already decoded its basic function. He looks at the hysterical elf with a calm, analytical gaze, completely unfazed by her outburst. The goblins, seeing the shiny object as a prize, begin to crowd around. "I want to try it too, Gobble," one of them shouts, eager to play with the sergeant's new gadget. The projection of Callian Aramate hears the name Gobble echo through the link and becomes visibly agitated. He turns, his sharp ears picking up the sounds of the orc camp. Sensing a presence that shouldn't exist within the elven network, Callian spins around with a look of pure outrage. "Who goes there?" he bellows at the mental shadows. But before his eyes could spot the little goblin, the mental connection snapped, leaving Callian alone in his white void, staring at the point where the signal had vanished. He was left with more questions than answers. Chaos erupts in the camp as the goblins start fighting over the tiara. Celia's face is pale with horror as she pleads with them to handle the sacred elven relic with care. "You reckless, primitive little monsters!" Celia shrieks, her hands over her head as she watches the goblins toss the priceless artifact back and forth like a common ball. In the middle of the scramble, a goblin's foot comes down hard on one of the slimes. The small creature let out a squelching sound as it is caught under the heavy tactical boot. The goblin trips and falls flat on his face, sending the golden tiara flying high into the air. It glints mockingly in the sunlight as it tumbles toward the mud. And so the tiara landed squarely on top of a slime, with a loud asterisk splat asterisk. The entire group falls silent, staring in shock at the slime. Egan, Celia, and the goblins stand frozen as they wait to see what the creature will do with the magic-infused metal. A strange, pinkish glow begins to emanate from within the slime, accompanied by an ominous sizzling sound. The artifact's magic is reacting violently to the creature's digestive enzymes. Celia lets out a bone-chilling scream of no, as she realizes her last hope of rescue is being literally digested. Her eyes are wide with a mix of terror and pure heartbreak. Duki, Pino, and Annie pile onto each other, their bodies merging as they enthusiastically lick and consume the golden metal. The lead slime looks up with a defiant expression as it finishes its meal. Back in his distant realm, Callian Aramate is hit with the final feedback of the artifact's destruction. He is left stunned and speechless, his connection to the forest severed completely. This giant, grotesque spirit explodes out of the slime, and Celia is absolutely losing it. In the middle of the light, an elven warrior spirit appears, crossing his twin swords in a defensive stance. The spectral fighter charges forward with a look of pure, desperate madness in his eyes. Then, just as fast as it showed up, the whole thing vanishes into a puff of smoke. Celia is left blinking, sweat dropping as she tries to figure out what just happened. A thought began to stir in the elven lord's mind. He imagined the scene where his daughter had been captured and worried incessantly about her current condition. He imagined the scene where his daughter had been captured and worried incessantly about her current condition. Crying into the dirt, she whispers an apology to the people she feels she failed. But then her sadness snaps into pure rage, and she vows to slaughter every single one of them. Egan just watches her have a breakdown in the background, looking a little annoyed by the noise. He ushered the goblins away, stammering that perhaps they should head out for a bit of hunting. Egan turns away, focused on his squad as they start moving out. He leans in and whispers to Duki about that magical artifact the slime just finished eating. He asks if it can turn that energy into a secure comms device that only his unit can use. He stands tall, his mind already on the next phase of the operation. The result is a set of golden earpieces that sprout right onto the goblins' heads. Gobble starts testing the signal, and his teammate is blown away by how clear it sounds. Egan looks satisfied. Having long-range comms is a huge tactical upgrade. He tells the squad that the preparations are finished, and it's time for their second live mission. He points toward a village in the distance, making it their primary target. He orders them to seize their sectors and secure a base, as the goblins ready their new handguns. Celia is left behind, gasping for breath and still reeling from the shock of losing her artifact. She realizes with horror that Egan has even managed to hijack the elves' own magic for communication. Watching the squad ride off on their new monster mount, she knows a total disaster is inevitable. She blames herself, thinking the innocent village is only in danger now because of her failure. She forces herself to crawl forward, telling herself she has to save those people. She grinds her teeth, desperately pleading for her own legs to just move. She figures with the orc finally gone, this is her one chance to break his control over her body. Her foot scrapes the ground, a tiny bit of movement, but it's a start. Her eyes light up. She can actually feel her muscles responding again. She's still on all fours, but the physical paralysis is finally starting to crack. She stays low, gathering every bit of strength she has left. She curses her own weakness, frustrated that her body is still being so slow. She forces herself to take a breath and remember her true purpose. She reminds herself she's a noble vanguard of the elf army, not some helpless prisoner. She starts chanting a desperate spell, calling out to the spirits of the wind. Reclaiming her title as the Flying Fang of Light, she finally finds her second wind. Glowing green energy swirls around her legs as she asks the wind to dwell within her body. With a final, furious scream, she vows to show them the undying rage of the elves. She takes off like a literal rocket, leaving a massive shockwave in her wake. She streaks through the air at high speed, screaming as she pushes her magic to the limit. Cilia has a wild, desperate look in her eyes, obsessed with reaching the village so she can call for reinforcements and finally get her revenge. She streaks through the woods like a bolt of light, driven by pure, undiluted spite for the orc who captured her. In her head, she's already imagining the look on Egan's face when she brings the fury of the elf army down on him. She finally makes it to the village, but it's already late and things are looking grim under the cold moonlight. Haramd, the vice leader of the road keepers, is busy choking a villager named Huxley while he demands answers. He laughs off the man's story about being attacked by an orc shaman who used lightning magic. Haramd doesn't even try to hide his smug grin, clearly enjoying the absolute power he has over the town. He stands in the middle of the village square, declaring that every road in and out now belongs to his mercenary guild. He dismisses the villagers' claims as a pathetic excuse for them to arm themselves and stage a revolt. The village elder begs him to believe them, but Haramd is already done listening to their pleas. He reminds the old man that the hostages and dwarf blacksmith they already took were supposed to be their final warning. With a casual wave of his hand, he orders his men to kill half the men and sell the rest of the families into slavery. Just as the mercenaries are about to start the slaughter, something stops Haramd in his tracks. He spots Cilia kneeling in the center of the square and realizes she definitely isn't one of the locals. Cilia is exhausted and covered in dirt, but she still looks like she's ready to fight for her life. Haramd walks over to her with a curious look, wondering who this strange girl actually is. She gasps for air, desperately telling the villagers they need to run before the orcs and goblins arrive. Haramd just laughs at her warning, thinking he's found a brand new way to entertain himself. He grabs her by the chin, delighted to realize that he's stumbled upon an actual elf. The other mercenaries are shocked, wondering if she's some high-ranking servant of the Gold Dragon. Haramd points to her forehead, noticing that her tiara is missing the crest it's supposed to have. He starts mocking her, guessing that she must have been some kind of outcast kicked out of her own home. He decides to take her in as his personal prize, and a massive, bald mercenary hauls her up like she's nothing. Haramd suggests they don't even need her arms, figuring it'll keep her from trying to run away. The bald mercenary holds her up like a doll, laughing about how light she is compared to a human child. He's busy bragging to his boss when a sudden bullet tears right into his chest, splattering blood across his skin. He looks down at the wound in total confusion, not even realizing what just happened yet. Another crack of gunfire hits him right in the neck, and he lets out a choked grunt as Cilia slips from his arms. A third shot sends him falling backward, his body crashing into the dirt as blood sprays everywhere. Haramd is left standing there with blood splattered across his face, stunned by the sudden, violent turn of events. A spent shell casing bounces off the ground, and the heavy sound of approaching boots fills the silence. Egan steps into the light with his handgun raised, looking completely unfazed by the crowd of mercenaries. He stands directly over Cilia, shielding her from the rest of the road keepers with his own body. He looks down at her and calmly tells her that he's here to get her out of this mess. Cilia stares up at him in total shock, unable to process the fact that he actually came for her. He levels his gun at Haramd and announces that he's here to rescue her and every last villager. He places a steadying hand on her shoulder, and she flinches as she feels the weight of his grip. The sensation is strangely familiar. It's exactly like the touch of the man she saw in her dreams. For a split second, she doesn't see a monster, but the human man she remembers from before. He asks if she has any injuries, and she manages to stammer out that she's okay. Egan doesn't waste any time, asking her if she'd be willing to interpret for him again. He raises his weapon and his other hand, calling out to the mercenaries that they're starting negotiations. Haramd is visibly shaken, his face splattered with blood as he tries to process the orc's sudden demand for negotiations. Egan keeps his hand raised, telling the guild leader that he'll give him plenty of time to think over the offer. Egan raises 3 fingers and begins a cold, steady countdown while never lowering his weapon. His eyes are locked onto his target as he marks the passage of time, his focus entirely on the man across from him. Nearby, Gobble and the Blue Goblin Scout stay hidden in the brush, their own handguns aimed and ready as the final second ticks away. The silence is shattered by a series of rapid-fire gunshots that tear through the air as the negotiation takes a violent turn.